So you can see the title of my talk up here. It has two subtitles, however, and I'd like to call attention. Well, first of all, SBT, of course, stands for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. And if you're not familiar with the Oxfrauds and the Misfits and their relationship to the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Although I'm also not going to let the Folger and some other folks off the hook in what I have to say here. The second subtitle is a documentary study of documentary evidence. And that is because I want all of us to question what is meant when Stratfordians use the term documentary evidence. They don't consider the sonnets, for example, to be documentary evidence. They consider them to be literary evidence and of secondary value compared to the record of Mr. Shakespeare's attempt to collect debts, etc., etc., etc. So being here at the Mark Twain House, of course, we must begin with Mark Twain. I lined up a half a dozen quotations from Is Shakespeare Dead?, the book that you cannot read in the 21st century in the collected works of Mark Twain because the academic editors of that series have omitted it. And quite appropriately, he was silent for a while, and I knew what was happening. A lot of you have had this experience along with Mark Twain. He was losing his temper. And I knew that he would presently close the session with the same old argument that was always his stay and his support in his time of need. The same old argument, the one I couldn't answer because I dasn't. My spell checker did not recognize that word. The argument that I was an ass and better shut up. He delivered it and I obeyed. Now, in addition to documentary evidence, the second key word I'd like you to take away from this talk is context. This is a very important word for us. So I'm going to show you in the next few slides pretty quickly what I think the context of our present discussion is. Once upon a time, we had the documentary life of Shakespeare. We were ambitious for learning. Notice the importance of the word document in this title. But then in 1984, a rumble was felt from deep underground. And let's see what happened next. Suddenly, something was in the air. Shakespeare was becoming uncanny. This is Marjorie Garber, Harvard professor, 1987, 3 years after the mysterious William Shakespeare. Suddenly we have Shakespeare's ghostwriters. Oh, and look at that. 1 year later, 1988, suddenly Shakespeare was a puzzle. This book, by the way, was the first and, well, the only really major Stratfordian publication that directly attacks us and states that our greatest sin was the seduction of Sigmund Freud. And yet, this is the dust jacket and the title of the book, Puzzling Shakespeare. And in many ways, this is the most interesting of the Stratfordian books that has come out since Ogburn, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Gary Taylor, 1989. I love this title because it seems to me that if you read it carefully, perhaps the designer might have been having a little bit of a joke. If you read just the red, what does it say? Appropriate, if you ask me. And then there was Shakespeare's personality, also in 1989. This is not an exact quotation. I just added this, but I reviewed this book in about 1991, and believe it or not, it says in the introduction that it is our fortune or misfortune to have completed this book at a time when Shakespeare's personality has disappeared. This is by three leading Freudian psychoanalytic commentators on Shakespeare. But this sort of distancing was not the only strategy. In 1994, Irvin Mattis gave us Shakespeare, in fact. Okay? The emphasis and the insistence on documents and facts continues, only it's been amped up as if a fact can make up for the manifest failures of over 2 centuries of biography. And here we have Eric Sams in 1995, The Real Shakespeare with the Mask. All of these are orthodox publications, and in 1999, Ian Wilson's Shakespeare the Evidence. Maybe they need a bigger magnifying glass, and that will solve it. So there are 5 parts to my talk, and this is the end of the first part. My conclusion is that at least since Charlton Ogburn's Mysterious William Shakespeare, even the title pages of orthodox Shakespearean works reflect the growing and increasingly ominous presence of the authorship question and various attempts to deflect it. Part 2. Now we're going to go back and run through the timeline again and look at some of the other things that were going on in addition to those orthodox publications. And we're going to start with Richmond Crinkly. How many people here know about this review in the Shakespeare Quarterly? Only a few people. This is one of the most important documents in the whole history of the controversy. This is Richmond Crinkly. It's the only photograph I was able to find of him on the web. He died in 1989, I believe, of AIDS. He was the founder of the Shakespeare Folger Library's theater, okay, and is a very distinguished man with a very significant career in theater and in film. And he reviewed Charlton Ogburn's Mysterious William Shakespeare in a 1985 edition of the Shakespeare Quarterly. And I'm going to give you, this is the most amount of text I'm going to give you on slides. Let me read to you part of what he wrote. Doubts about Shakespeare came early and grew rapidly. They have a simple and direct plausibility. The plausibility has been reinforced by the tone and methods by which traditional scholarship has responded to the doubts. And I'm going to show you in a couple minutes that this review had zero impact, apparently, on that problem that Stratfordians have. Orthodoxy calls into question not only the arguments of anti-Stratfordians, but often the sanity of the person making the argument. Can anti-Stratfordians, and by the way, some of us now prefer the term post-Stratfordian. We don't want to think of ourselves as against anything. We are in favor of a more open and coherent discussion of the authorship question. Can an anti-Stratfordian, he continues, be reasonably expected to endure more comment about the dementia of the unfortunate Delia Bacon or the surname of John Thomas Looney, or Loney, however you prefer to pronounce it. As one who found himself a contented agnostic Stratfordian at the Folger, I was enormously surprised at what can only be described as the viciousness toward anti-Stratfordian sentiments expressed by so many otherwise rational and courteous scholars. In its extreme forms, the hatred of unorthodoxy was like some bizarre mutant racism. The anti-Stratfordians were lesser breeds before the law, without the law. This baffled me. One did not, after all, have to agree with heterodoxy to accord it intellectual courtesy, or, for that matter, to represent it accurately. Charlton Ogburn chronicles a sorry record of abuse from the orthodox, much of it directed at assertions never made, positions never held, opinions never expressed. He accounts for it as the defense of a vested interest. Can Orthodox scholars, Ogburn asks, really risk having their livelihoods in danger if their scholarship is found wanting? And of course, the SBT is, I don't know, no one knows the exact figure, but it's a $500 million a year tourist industry, at least, and maybe larger than that. Although it is not, contrary to what I recently thought, the second biggest tourist destination in England, it is one of the biggest ones. Continues Crinkly, surely this assumption is too facile. The better explanation is that the zeal and intensity by which believers possess a presumed intellectual truth owes more to underlying quasi-religious impulses than to economic self-interest. Although I would argue those two are intertwined here, but I think he's on to something in this critique of Ogburn. To be an authority on Shakespeare, Stratford-upon-Avon is, of course, a commercial enterprise. But it also has something of the eerily hagiographic about it. Hagiography is a life of the saints, okay, a life of a saint. To be an authority on Shakespeare has long conferred a special intellectual standing that has set apart many defenders of the orthodox citadel from their opponents and invested them with a special status. Orthodox scholarship defends its inherited wisdom from the exalted knowledge of a clerisy somehow attuned to special knowledge. And I think this is one of the things that when I read it in about 1991, I went, wow, okay? So I think we need to say more about Richmond Crinkly and make him a part of our story. This is 1986. Shakespeare revealed in Oxford's letters. How many people have seen this book or know about it? Okay, quite a few more. This is a terrific book. It's not a book you're going to sit down and read from start to finish. It's 922 pages long or something like that, going through 37 letters of the Earl of Oxford and showing in copious detail their many interconnections to the Shakespearean canon. This would be easy for the Stratfordians to refute, by the way. It's a fairly simple thing. It's hard for us because we don't have the resources they have. Find a body of 30 to 40 letters of a contemporary Elizabethan like Sir Philip Sidney and see if you can match with that what Fowler did in this book, and you will disprove the book. I am confident, having read a few of those letters and knowing what some of the voices sound like from that period, that that's an impossible task and it's never been attempted. 1988, we got we didn't get front page coverage. This image here is actually from a photocopy that Ruth Lloyd Miller sent me, and this is not really on the cover, but this is in the volume. This is a review of the 1987 moot court held at American University, a sympathetic review before a crowd of 1,000 persons. Unfortunately, since the time of the publication of this in the New Yorker, it appears that the New Yorker editors are being kept on a fairly short leash, held in the hands of supposed experts, such as Columbia University's James Shapiro and Gail Kern-Pastor, the leading Stratfordian cold warrior at the Folger Library. Also in 1989, we got the Frontline documentary that was previously mentioned here. Another thing that in 1991 left a huge impact on me, and in fact, this was my first exposure to the question. The Stratfordians love to say that the moot court was a failure for the Oxfordians because the 3 Supreme Court justices who were there voted to uphold the traditional perspective because it was announced that the burden of proof was on the Oxfordians to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that our guy wrote the plays. Under those conditions, the judgment is entirely understandable. What Stratfordians can't seem to remember is that 3 years later, John Paul Stevens published in the Pennsylvania Law Review the Shakespeare Canon of Statutory Construction, which basically lends a great deal of support and clear analysis to the Oxfordian movement. I had to throw a few things in here about what I was doing. By 1994, I became the first graduate student I believe, in the history of the University of Massachusetts to deliver from outside the English department an English department colloquium. There was great controversy attending that, and Bill Mabius, whose name is on this flyer here, was the chair of the comparative literature department, was a remarkable diplomat, and I think of him in the line about Hamlet that about standing between much heat and him, and a number of professors from that department did that for me in various ways. This is Mortimer Adler. Do we know who Mortimer Adler is? We should know who he is because he's the founder of the Great Books program at the University of Chicago. And Professor Shapiro, you need to understand about him too. According to Mortimer Adler in 1997, academics err in failing to acknowledge the mystery surrounding Shakespeare's identity. They would do both liberal education and the works of Shakespeare a distinguished service by opening the question to the judgment of their students and others outside the academic realm. Words that, in the main, up to this point in time, have fallen on deaf ears. I engaged in an extended correspondence with Charlton Ogburn. I have about 30 or 40 letters from him. And there he is at the moot court, paying very careful attention to what's going on. Let me just quote from this document. The outlook for us is bright, I think. I'd surely much better be one of us than one of the Shakespeare establishment. 1999. If you want to know why Hillary Clinton has made comments about the authorship question and wanting to meet the real author, this is probably why. I'm sure her staff picked this up and discussed it with her. Who wrote Shakespeare alongside the Clintons and their future? An excellent article. An excellent article which had the fate of just about any really good piece that gets out there that the editors were stomped on for the next 3 weeks by Stratfordians writing nasty letters. Harpers magazine, also in 1999. This is actually, they did this sort of double cover, which I thought was quite clever, where you have to lift the cover before you get a little bit more of the rough. Mark Anderson has already spoken about this. He was one of the contributors to it, along with Richard Whalen, Joseph Sobran, Daniel Wright, and Tom Bethel on our team, and Harold Bloom, Marjorie Garber, Gail Kern-Pastor, and Irvin Mattis on the other team. I wanted to throw this in here because there has been a fair amount of discussion about the Prince Tutor question here at the conference. My position on this is that we need to be open-minded and tell the world that we don't, as an organization and a movement, have a definitive conclusion yet, and that that's our strength. Our diversity is our strength. But if you want to read my contribution to this, this is in the Tennessee Law Review of 2004. It's easily available on the web, and it's about Venus and Adonis. And I just want to point out that the abstract begins, this article analyzes the history of scholarship on Venus and Adonis to highlight outstanding contradictions which cast doubt on orthodox premises of authorship. Literature review should be one of our principles. And then in 2011, Anonymous. And as Richard Waugeman has reminded me, this is the point at which the doctrine of Stratfordian infallibility went into high gear. This film struck terror into the hearts of many Stratfordian professors. And I did not know this, but apparently the doctrine of papal infallibility, I would have guessed this was from the 17th century or the 16th century. It's not. It's from the 19th century, and it was a result of the loss of the papal states in Italy that had formerly been not only under the religious but also the political and military jurisdiction of the papacy. So the doctrine of papal infallibility is a narcissistic response to a loss of real-world power. I think that that's essentially an apt analogy to what we're about to see here. So conclusion number 2, during the 1990s, while Stratfordians continued to invoke disembodied and decontextualized fact and reality alongside ghostwriting, puzzling, and reinventing, post-Stratfordians and Oxfordians continued to move the debate forward, bringing new data and fresh perspectives to the inquiry. And since Anonymous, the doctrine of Stratfordian infallibility has gained an ever tighter control over the Stratfordian imagination. So the third part of my talk is called Stratfordians Bite Back. And that's their language, not ours. Okay? I'll show you where that comes from. 2014, I believe it is. This came out. Now notice it's got the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, powered by the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. And also on it is in partnership with Misfit Incorporated. So who is Misfit anyway? And, you know, maybe at some point Richard Wagnerman, who is a very distinguished psychoanalyst, could discuss the psychological implications of the wording here. I'm not going to get into that. We don't have a lot of time. But it is sort of interesting. Even if you're like me and know just a little bit about psychoanalysis, this is an interesting wording. So it has an introduction by Paul Edmondson and Professor Stanley Wells. The Reverend Dr. Paul Edmondson, the Director of Research and Knowledge at the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. It's not enough that it's research. He's also the Director of Knowledge. Let's tell you a true story. A Shakespearean scholar climbed into a taxi in Los Angeles. The Russian driver asked where his passenger came from. Stratford-upon-Avon. Well, of course, if he's a Shakespeare scholar, he must come from there. Ah, Shakespeare. Yes, that's right. There is so much we don't know about Shakespeare. He didn't write the plays, did he? You see, they have problems. They have problems. What might have been a quiet journey turned into the Shakespearean passenger giving a full account. Must have been a long taxi drive. No, maybe it was a really short taxi drive of Shakespeare of Stratford as the author of the works attributed to him. The taxi driver listened carefully and understood clearly. But was he convinced by the time his passenger got out at the Getty Museum? He was certainly handsomely tipped. There you go, okay? Stratfordians like to give very handsome tips to their taxi drivers. Jonathan Bate did that after the debate with Alexander Waugh, by the way. Okay, so this is a little bit about what the book is about. It's about true stories like this one. So, who are the Misfits? Well, so you can look them up on the web, and there's quite a bit of information about the Misfits, and you can see right here that they are disgustingly creative. It's obvious, isn't it? Studio Misfit is an international design, communication, and animation studio that works exclusively with the rebels, the subversives, and the nonconformists. Well, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust is the quintessence of nonconformism. So, and they have this, their website is very cleverly designed. They know what they're doing when it comes to website design. And so when you click on the link that takes you to, who recommends them? Who have they worked for? And you get this. This is where we're supposed to impress you with a wall of logos. Have we worked with some of the biggest? Sure. Did we ever give a shit about their size? Fuck no. I mean, SBT really knows how to pick representatives online, don't they? We have helped breathe life into brands, campaigns, websites, mobile applications, animated videos, and social initiatives for some of the largest as well as the smallest organizations all over this fine planet. Internationalism is a theme of the Misfits. They've done all kinds of wonderful things all over the world. At least you can see photos of them doing that on their websites. We work across a wide array of industries: travel, technology, hospitality, the arts, heritage, the third sector. But no matter where or with whom we work, we invest every last drop of creativity we can muster into each and every project we take on. And again, we can see the immense, disgusting creativity in the design here, and also a self-representation, it seems to me, of who the Misfits are. So this is a website that I don't have documentary evidence, but I'm willing to bet that the Misfits designed for the SBT. And you see it hits all the points. Join the most vibrant community of Shakespeare lovers on the internet. Something got a little cut off there. This is too small to see, but there are 0 comments on this. And that really proves this point, it seems to me. I mean, that is really a vibrant, interactive community. So this is from a blog entry by the Misfits. Misfit is, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, Misfit is generally shrouded in mystery. We walk a very balanced fine line between transparency and intense secrecy. But now we're ready to pull back the curtain to allow you to peek into some of the work that our company has been doing around the world lately. So let's hear from A.J. Leon himself, the founder of Misfits, who, by the way, is also a trustee of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. And we're going to hear in A.J. Leon's own words why he is so qualified to be a trustee of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust.
My name is A.J. Leon, and I'm the founder of a company called Misfit, and I'm also a trustee of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. I've been a trustee for the last 2 years. I love the SBT. I love being a part of the organization. I've been a volunteer, and I volunteer my time on and off for the last 10 years, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. For me, Shakespeare, in a very non-figurative sense, changed the entire trajectory of my life. Had I not been served him up when I was 15 years old by a wonderful teacher as a punk kid growing up in the United States, I don't know where I'd be right now. So to be a trustee at this organization means a lot to me at a personal level. Also, I love working with the SBT because of the omnilateral nature of the work. Right? I mean, you have the houses actually in Stratford-upon-Avon, but there's also the education department, the research department run by Paul Edmondson, a friend of mine. You have the collections department and a lot of cultural outreach and programs right now. And I know, I work in the heritage space and I meet a lot of people in kind of cultural and heritage. Right now, I think the SBT is one of the most exciting cultural organizations to be a part of in Europe. And I'm honored to have a seat as a trustee.
So I always try to tell my students that you want to be as detailed as possible when you make statements and claims. So I'm just really curious. I didn't hear the name of a junior high school or a teacher, and that makes me really wonder what's going on here. I'm sure that Shakespeare maybe was a young saver for A.J. Leon, but his knowledge of the subject doesn't seem to advance very far by my standards. So this is I have to thank my wife Shelley for she's very good with graphics, better than I am. And this is just, we notice we didn't draw any arrows here, but these entities are all linked. So we have the big, powerful entities at the top. We know that Cambridge University Press published the Shakespeare Beyond Doubt, and Oxford University Press has also done collaboration with them. And since AJ is now on the board of trustees, we added him to the line. Now, Jonathan Bate was a trustee, but is not a current trustee. He left around the same time that AJ Leon came on. We don't know if there's a connection between those two things, but there could be. And we could draw direct arrows between Bate and AJ Leon and Paul Edmondson, at least, to the Misfits. And now I'm going to show you a little bit about the connection between the Misfits and the Oxfrauds, and we've lined up 5 of the leading Oxfrauds in the bottom, including Nat Wilk, a.k.a. Greer Gilman, and Tom Reedy, who's been at this for a long time. And you know what? I made a mistake on this slide. The picture that is on Mike Ledbetter should be on Mike Gordon. We could not find a picture of Mike Ledbetter. And I apologize for that mistake, but that's actually Mike Gordon. And I'm going to show you where that picture came from in just a minute. So what do the Oxfrauds do? So they go after anyone and everyone who is a threat or perceived to be a threat to the cliched thinking of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. This is, and it's a very fancy website. I encourage you to go there. Some people have said, well, you should go to this site and see what they say about Stritmatter's work on the Oxford Bible. I encourage you to do that because I want you to be able to compare and contrast the way they handle evidence with the way I and other post-Stratfordians handle evidence. They come wherever there is something going on the internet that could be problematic, and they invaded Ross Barber's online course and sat in the back row and talked loudly and threw spit wads, and I would have thrown them out of my classroom. But Ross Barber is maybe a little more tolerant than I am, and this was her reward. They cherry-picked the reviews. I read the reviews of her course. I participated for a few days and then left because I got tired of these guys. So they cherry-picked, their own reviews, saying that the course was abysmal, unacceptable, and an affront to scholarship. Now, that last point, I want to point out, none of these people have any credentials or qualifications or ethos to talk about what scholarship is, but according to their paymasters, it was an affront to scholarship. And this is about all of you sitting in here. The anti-Shakespeareans have gone mad again. This is a Oxfraud meme that was published in another forum, the Shakespeare forum online, which on Facebook, which is a surrogate, also a surrogate in some way for the SBT. And Shelley and I, along with at least one other person, were thrown off of this organization for our response to this statement. And one of the people that was thrown off was not a post-Stratfordian. He is now. He simply stood up for civil discussion, and they threw him off too. David Monti is a very accomplished, written a wonderful book about acting Shakespeare. And he's now active on SV, and he's a great addition to our conversation. So this is the photo that I showed you of Mike Gordon. This is Mike Gordon on the Oxfraud Facebook posing with an automatic weapon. Several of us have tried repeatedly to have this removed. Facebook doesn't seem to care about it. He will tell you it's a joke. Okay, maybe it's a joke to him. It's not a joke to me. And conversing with a bloke named Alistair Brown and saying, firepower and passion for the cause. I guess Alistair Brown's got his bazooka also. So they're coming at us with the heavy artillery. And here's another example of the wonderful discussion that happens on the Oxfraud Facebook page. This is especially for those of you that have worked on the SI 100 committee. This is the Oxfrauds version of what they're going to do to you. Sort of medieval, sledgehammer to the brains. So, I mentioned they don't have any scholarly qualifications. Let's verify that with documentary evidence. Richard Wagman pulled this for me. There's a lot of you who probably should be up here too, but just to make the point, I just gave myself and Richard Wagman, these are the number of citations we have in the World Shakespeare Bibliography, which is a truly, this is the fine wing of the Stratfordians. These people are bibliographers. They believe in covering the debate. And that's why both Richard and I have, 60 or so citations. Mike Ledbetter, 0. Oliver Cam, not going to talk a lot about Oliver Cam, but some of you know who Oliver Cam is. Also 0. He's an ally of the Oxfrauds. Greer Gilman, 0. Tom Reedy is the biggest scholar in this group, 5 citations in the World Shakespeare Bibliography Database. A.J. Leon has 1, Mike Gordon. I actually added Mike Gordon. I'm not 100% sure that that's true, but I'm willing to bet that he doesn't have any either. So conclusion number 3, the Oxfrauds are a gang of internet trolls, supported and sponsored. And I didn't present you this evidence, but many of us have heard Jonathan Bate refer curious people to the Oxfrauds. So it's not controversial that he has recommended these folks. So supported and sponsored by Jonathan Bate and the SBT by means of the Misfits. They routinely substitute aggressive personal attacks on post-Stratfordians, make arguments removed from context, and cherry-pick data to support their own preordained conclusions. They have become a 21st century manifestation of the bizarre mutant racism that in the 1980s was still confined to the tea room of the Folger Library. In short, they agree with Mark Twain. When we find a vague trail of chipmunk trunks stringing through the dust of Stratford Village, we know by our reasoning powers that Hercules has been along there. Part 4, I told you I was not going to let the Folger off the hook. So I'm going to talk for a few slides about the Folger's first Folio tour in 2016, and I gave a subtitle to this, Hiding the Evidence That's in Plain Sight. I am drawing here significantly on the work of my wife, Shelley Maycock, who, as you know, has presented about this. And also Brian Wildenthal. This is a piece of one of the brochures on your left-hand side, a piece of one of the brochures put out by the Folger on this. And on the other side is their claim. This is the claim made to the libraries and the funding agencies that provided the money to put on this tour. They want to explain what the first folio is and help to situate the book in its historic context. They contextualize the importance of this particular book. Remember, I said context is a key term here. Let's see how they contextualize the book. They do not mention, or at least do not discuss in any detail, in any of the promotional materials provided with this, which went to multiple libraries all across the United States. They don't mention or deal with Ben Jonson. They don't mention Pembroke or Montgomery, to whom the book is dedicated. And they don't mention the Spanish marriage crisis. Just to fill in quickly for those of you who this may be new to, this book, the Folio, came out at the height of the most intense constitutional crisis in England in probably at least a 50-year period leading up to the Civil War, when King James wanted to marry his eldest son to the Infanta of Spain. And Protestants in the country, including prominently Henry de Vere, the Earls of Pembroke and Montgomery, and the Earl of Stanley and his wife, another of de Vere's daughters, were staunchly opposed to this. This is not a disinterested literary production from the point of view of the people who actually did it. It has a political edge to it. None of that context is presented in the Folger Library Tour. They fooled the funding agencies into believing that they were contextualizing something when they were doing the opposite of that. So these omissions smack of prior intent. They actually decontextualize the folio with a specific goal in mind. They want to lay sole emphasis on Hemmings and Condell as the motivating forces in the folio. And they did this despite the fact, and this is a documentary fact, as I'm going to show you in a minute, that several generations of scholars, starting with the Holy Orthodox Stevens and later Malone, urged that at least one of the two epistles with the names of the actors on it was actually written by Ben Jonson, someone strategically not named. I think I didn't get quite my last version of this up here. I apologize. There should be a period or something there. Strategically not named in the Folger's materials. This is Shelley's article, and she asks, and I think partially answers the question, did the Folger program violate the American Library Association standards for objectivity and neutrality in this production? And I certainly think there's a strong case to be made that they did, because the libraries have strong standards. You're supposed to be objective and neutral. They did not even provide the facts that would be required to take an objective and neutral view of what the folio really was. So not only Edmund Malone, but also E.K. Chambers concluded that Jonson had written at least parts of the address to the general reader. And in my opinion, no one familiar with Jonson's prose epistolary style in introducing his own plays can doubt the great similarities between the language of his dedications and the language in the two, actually, in the folio. Now, it's not just, however, the fact that the folio appears to have put the names of Hemming and Condell on something that Ben Jonson wrote. I show this slide to my Coppin State University students, and I ask them, describe to me the difference between these two folios. The one on the left is, of course, Ben Jonson's folio of 1616, and the one on your right is the Shakespeare First Folio. The differences are dramatic and important. Notice the ornate circle around Ben Jonson and the inscription immediately beneath the image and the ornate decorative elements of the main title page. That comparison helps to explain why Leo Marcus refers to this example as iconoclastic, rhetorically turbulent, and Protestant. It's intended to evoke a feeling of disquiet and discomfort. The only reason we don't see that is we have not spent enough time looking at the other examples of how these prefatory materials are put together. So let's move on to the expert speak. We all know that Jonathan Bate and Alexander Waugh in 2017 had quite a remarkable debate. There were supposed to be two debates. The first one was supposed to focus on whether or not the Stratford man was the author, and the second was to debate that Oxford was the author. The second debate never happened. I'd like to know from Jonathan Bate why that was. As we're going to see, he proclaimed victory, but on dubious grounds. So this is my second little clip here. This is not from the debate. I have a lot of favorite clips of Jonathan Bate, and this is my favorite one of all time. This is from Last Will and Testament.
What people who want to construct fantasies about a kind of hidden author behind the plays, what they do is they take little coincidences, arbitrary parallels, and try to weave them together into a coherent narrative. I could as easily map the life of Elvis Pressley onto a work by Shakespeare as I could map the life of Lord Burleigh or the Earl of Oxford.
Think of the author.
Oops. So here's my challenge to Professor Bate. He says he can do this as easily, and he hasn't done it, by the way. We'd like to hear him do it. And this is our bibliography for Oxford, right here. The new edition is coming out. The 5th edition is coming out. It's bigger than this. So I wonder what his bibliography is to support his notion that Elvis Pressley might have written the work. This is Jonathan Bate's website, and immediately after the debate, within a matter of minutes or hours, he posted references for Mr. Waugh. And he says, I don't think I'm ever going to change the mind of someone whose argument appears to rest on the proposition that Ben Jonson faked Hemming and Condell's dedicatory epistle and address to the reader in the first folio. So here's what George Stevens, one of the most important of all 19th century Shakespeare editors said, I'm just going to give you the first little bit here. After the publication of my first edition of Shakespeare's works, a notion struck me that the preface prefixed by the players in 1623 to their edition of his plays had much of the manner of Ben Jonson, and an attentive comparison of the preface with various passages in Jonson's writings having abundantly supported and confirmed my conjecture, I do not hesitate now to assert that the greater part of it was written by him. So apparently Jonathan Bate would not convince George Stevens. So he listed a series of references. I just want to call attention to this one, which he calls, Jonathan Bate on his website called this a banquet, anon. And this is what it says: having traveled through Stratford-upon-Avon, a town most remarkable for the birth of the famous William Shakespeare. Does anybody notice something about that? It's a fragment. Okay? Well, the title is also a fragment. His followers, and this is another Bate misfit Oxfraud connection. Nate Wilk was one of the first on here. Withered is the garland of the wall. She's very poetic, Greer Gilman is. So it's important that you know that these were posted, because we're talking about documents here. So someone was approving comments to Bates' blog. It's not a case that he put up a blog and then walked away and didn't come back for the next 5 years. So this is what I wrote. And you'll notice, what does it say at the top? Your comment is awaiting moderation. It's still awaiting moderation. That's why I took a screenshot. And I gave him the complete text. One traveling through Stratford-upon-Avon, a town most remarkable for the birth of the famous William Shakespeare, and walking in the church to do his devotion, espied a thing there worth observation, which was a tombstone laid more than 300 years ago, on which was engraven an epitaph to this purpose: I, Thomas, such a one, and Elizabeth, my wife, hereunder lie buried, and no reader, IRC and I, Christoph Q, are alive at this hour to witness it. Now you know why that was a fragment. So can we understand this a little more? Well, we can if we read the entire title. A banquet of jests. Oh, we thought it was just called a banquet. It was actually called a banquet of jests. So I said, please explain the jest, Professor. And Professor Bate, I'm waiting. As some of you know, Alexander Waugh and I completed and I have only 1 minute left, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. We have completed a several hundred-page volume of early Shakespeare allusions. We have now been shot down by 3 university presses, and I am far less discouraged about that as I might be, because we have this book by Brian Wildenthal, a brilliant work of self-publication. If anybody ever tries to tell you that there was no Shakespeare authorship question until the 19th century, this is the book you need to patiently and gently explain to them, disproves that. It's only the tip of the iceberg, as Brian himself would acknowledge, but it's the tip of the iceberg that we have out there. So let's see. Shapiro, really quickly, notice that Shapiro says that the dedicatory epistle of Venus and Adonis is addressed to the Earl of Southampton and signed William Shake-Spear, included in italics in the front matter of both. It's the first time the notorious hyphen appeared in the printed version of his name, a telling sign for skeptics of pseudonymous publication. So here it is. What? Not only do I not see a hyphen there, I don't see any italics. So I'm going to close on this point. I had a few more slides, but we're out of time. The camera is on. Professor Shapiro, I would flunk you. I would flunk you not only for having the audacity to compare Justice Stevens to the Pizzagate conspirator, but also I would flunk you because you are a lousy scholar and you have used grotesque ad hominems to cover up your own incompetence as a scholar. You published a book that has appeared around the world that contains patently false information on which you attempted to build your own argument. And thank you for your attention. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but I'd be glad to speak to anyone who wants to talk.